live, my friend. I am.
Thank you for having me.
Oh man, I am. The pleasure is all mine. I've been dreaming of this interview for many years, ever since I first watched you at Power Monkey, and I was like, this man is very smart. I need to pick his brain as much as I can. So, for everybody that's joining us, this is kind of we call it, I guess, our Expert of the Month series. So every month I try to bring on one person who has significantly influenced the way that I think or has changed the way that I think about gymnastics and medical treatment. And we have Jay Lydon on here once, and then we had Jamie, nutritionist. She's coming on as well. So we have a really cool lineup, but I think the best thing is that I can just pull from everybody else's experience and their life and kind of build it into how do we help gymnastics be safer, have longer careers, be healthier, and especially in a time when gymnastics is changing very fast. Energy systems and the cardio aspect of training is huge right now. So I thought of nobody else than yourself to ask to come on.
Well, thank you. I've always enjoyed our conversations, and I admire your thirst for knowledge and just trying to find a better way. I always tell people, especially in the sport of CrossFit, that no coach has it figured out. And I don't think that any coach truly has a model, even on sports that have been around for, hundreds of years. So I love your thirst for knowledge. I think that it's very appealing.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I tell people that I always think that I have something figured out and I don't get an answer. I get 6 more questions.
I love when we interact on certain athletes and certain things that we see, and I find it interesting what you're immediately able to understand in terms of the context that I put things, and that's always nice. It's hard when you communicate with somebody for the first time, because you don't know what their foundation of knowledge is, and you don't know where to settle that level of information, meaning how simplistic or how advanced that you can go. And it's cool that I could show you a photograph and you immediately can see what I see, and that's awesome.
Yeah, man, we've gone down the rabbit hole a couple of times into some stuff, and I love it.
Yeah,
that's the best place to start is, I have a lot of people who follow in CrossFit. They know you very well. They're, through Power Monkey and stuff, but I also have a really large follower base who probably is unfamiliar with your work. They're probably familiar with your work through me, because everyone always thinks like, wow, you know so much about energy system training. I'm like, well, I just listen to Chris and Jay and I read a lot of books. So can you give people a very short background to kind of your athletic background, but also your coaching status right now, just to kind of frame the conversation we're going to have?
So my athletic background, I'm without a doubt, I come from an endurance background, primarily in the sport of triathlon, swimming, biking, and running. The Ironman in Hawaii, I've done at least 10 Ironmans. Most of those.
In my car once. That was a pretty long run.
I know. Well, I look back on those days, and boy, what a monumental. Yeah, it's interesting, the brainwashing in time, that you become accustomed to what you're doing and you don't think it's very significant. And in hindsight, I look back on those years and it was more than significant. I would never go back and repeat those days. Really, really tough. But I had a lot of success just because of genetics and hard work.
Mm-hmm.
But the sport, it kind of took its toll on me in terms of the volume that I did. But I had a lot of advantages back then because of just the skill set. It gave me a lot of access to unique testing protocols, coaching, even shoe companies and the things that they were doing. And a lot of that I've carried into today. I found the sport of CrossFit in my mid-40s, so actually a little over 10 years ago, as a way of kind of restoring my health. And I got back into coaching during CrossFit because I was given a chance to coach an elite level CrossFitter that went on to the CrossFit Games, which is the premier event in CrossFit, and placed second overall that year. And arguably before that, he was the worst endurance athlete of the sport. And he went on, out of the 4 endurance events at the CrossFit Games, he won 3 of them and got third in the 4th event. And so that kind of gave me an opportunity to kind of follow my passion, which is coaching and finding a better way for the person who was looking at improved fitness. And that's really how I classify that CrossFit market.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think that something is incredible as CrossFit is there's so many different subsets of training energy domains, and you have to be really good at a couple different areas. Whereas maybe in your experiences as an elite level, runner, you were really good in that long aerobic capacity end, versus someone who's an Olympic sprinter just has to focus on the short bursted stuff. But you've kind of lived in all domains. You got to constantly tweak and figure out how do I help the athlete become good at this and good at this system, and kind of manage these two together. And I think that's why you have such an incredible, vast knowledge base, but perspective is because you see both angles, whereas some sport coaches just live in one energy system and it's kind of all they understand.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. For me, you have to respect anybody's time, whether it's a recreational athlete or if it's someone who's trying to win the CrossFit Games. I've been very lucky to be involved in coaching athletes that went on to win the CrossFit Games, many of those. And from my side of it, what I have to do is keep them interested, keep their performances constantly improving. And if I don't recognize their individual strengths and weaknesses, and through assessments and also workout reviews, then what's going to happen is I may push them in the wrong direction that leads to zero adaptation. And so understanding whether or not they are a speed strength power athlete, a fast twitch anaerobic athlete, or whether or not they're more of a slow twitch endurance athlete, and looking at just their physical makeup and whether or not there are certain protocols that will drive faster adaptation. But that assessment of those athletes, no matter what level, is critical. We never want to waste their time,
right?
Especially in the sport of CrossFit where they have 1,000 things that they can do.
Yeah, and that's kind of something that a lot of coaches struggle with is trying to optimize the time they have and making sure it's efficient. And that's one of the main reasons why I really grabbed onto a lot of what you were saying is I felt as a younger coach, because I had no education in gymnastics or my own training, that I felt like I was literally just throwing stuff against the wall and hope it stick. And this will kind of lead into the first question is I remember the first lecture I ever sat in of yours at Power Monkey, you were talking about one of the athletes you first worked with is that, and correct me if the story is wrong, but the way he tried to train his 400 meter time was just doing the fastest 400 that he could. And then he would recover until he felt kind of okay. And he would try to do it again. And from his point of view, that was like a golden program. And from your point of view, you're like, that is ridiculous. Like that's never going to work. You know what I mean? And I see this in gymnastics is, especially in the events, the apparatuses, is that people are just doing routines or exercises that look like competition, doing that training sport specific wise as much as they can. And they don't maybe understand that there's a way over multiple months to prepare those energy systems for the demand that's going to come in a much lower risk situation, where in gymnastics, you're not going to do a floor routine and blow your ACL out on the last tumbling pass because you're not cardio wise even prepared. You know what I mean? So what are your thoughts on that?
So, wow. So I love that first of all, that first talk that I gave made an impact.
And I went back and read many books after you said that kind of stuff. I was like, well, that makes sense. But for 20 years, I never thought that.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is that if you put a stimulus on the body, you give it good nutrition, good recovery, it will lead to an adaptation. And the logic of the human body, it doesn't need a lot of science to explain huge amounts of it. If I give you the stimulus of running and I make you run fast all the time, then your body's going to develop an ability to perform the movement of running, but also to do it very fast. And a lot of people are confusing endurance with speed, and they're on mutual ends of the spectrum. It's the same thing with fast twitch muscle fiber athletes and slow twitch athletes. But if we're trying to create a more well-rounded athlete, then we have to look at how they were training. And that's the very first thing that I do is in assessments of athletes is, how are you currently training? And what is the scope of the event that you're actually training for? And are we leaving certain energy systems, metabolic pathways behind, meaning they're underdeveloped, or certain muscle fiber groups within the body behind? Because one of the mistakes that I made in the sport of triathlons is that I never had a finishing kick, for example. I never had that closing speed, that speed reserve. I mean, I had to make my move 10K out.
Yeah.
That was a mistake, and not intentionally. It's just that the people that I had were focused on 9-hour-long events and not my finishing sprint. And I never understood why I didn't have that. I mean, I never went into the weight room when I was doing the sport of triathlons. I never picked up a barbell. And in hindsight, it's obvious why I had no explosive power. And so part is that I want athletes to look at themselves, and are they leaving muscle groups behind, motor units behind that can contribute to their overall fitness? I mean, I think that you're on the gymnastics side. The question would be, is that, are there certain motor units within the movements, the routines that they're doing, being ignored by the way in which they're training? And what we want to do is develop that entire spectrum of muscle fibers.
Right. Yeah. And that's, again, you're going to hear a certain pattern. There's moments when I listened to you and I thought, wow, I never thought about it that way. And something that I always embraced and never really did, again, mistakes as a younger coach, is I would only train bursted 30 to 60 second efforts, thinking that that's all gymnastics needed. That's how we compete from 7 seconds to 90 seconds. I was like, there's no value in long aerobic training. There's no value in doing longer circuits, because I just thought that if you train the sport, you'd be okay. And what I came to realize from reading more about the information you said is that, you know, the aerobic capacity of a bursted athlete is very valuable, because in those three systems, you have your, you know, your very short bursted 7-second PCR, and then your middle phase glycolytic, and then your longer plus 2 minutes. Is that between repeat bursted sprints, between doing a turn or doing a 60-second effort, you have to recover through your aerobic system. And I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. I see it all the time. I watch Olympic level athletes do a floor routine, and they are like blacking out after they do a floor routine because they can't recover fast enough, and they get rushed to the next event, and then they perform very poorly on the next event because they haven't recovered. That is your aerobic system, right? And I think that I've tried to change my thought process about maybe there's value in training, again, that entire spectrum of fibers for the actual performance, but to recover between bouts.
Yeah, I mean, I find that the sport of gymnastics is very interesting in the sense that, you know, you have these multiple routines, and in large part they're shorter duration. I also like the fact that when they rotate, that you have a set amount of rest in between your routines, and I would think that to optimize performances, you would need to be taking into consideration the time domains for all of those routines, as well as the recovery between those routines,
right,
in order to maximize performance. And one of the things, and forgive me for not knowing a lot about gymnastics. I mean, I know the sport, but not in depth. That space in between, like you were mentioning, that 10 minutes between routines, I see athletes sitting.
Yeah.
And when you, let's face it, just like I said, if you practice sitting, meaning a passive recovery, then your body only becomes good at passive recovery. And my question would be is it known, is it proven that I can do a active recovery within that 10-minute time period? And would I clear more lactate that just accrued in that previous routine by actually performing a movement? And would that put me in a better position for the next routine?
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting.
And that is true, though. I mean, in active recovery, if you practice it, I mean, one of the things that I tell CrossFitters all the time is I love the assault bike after you do a workout. I like it. If that workout is really long and you are creating blood lactate, then I like the fact that there are so many muscles being used that could potentially pull that lactate out of the bloodstream and consume it as a fuel in my slow twitch aerobic fibers. But the thing is that if they never practice that movement, they have never done an assault bike after training to clear blood lactate, then the body's not efficient at it. You have to practice it. So if a gymnast is sitting in a chair during their 10 minutes, that's all they become good at. This is something that needs to be added to their training protocol to develop or accelerate the rate in which their muscles that have just worked so explosively, right, and developed not only blood lactate, but imagine the tremendous localized lactate that's developed in the muscles moving and the neighboring muscle groups is massive.
Yeah.
And if they focused on that in their training and included protocols of that, their recovery period, that 10 minutes, their body would be more prepared for the next routine, without a doubt.
Yeah, and that's really intriguing, and that's something that I had thought about but never really connected the dots on. Is like, you're using, like you said, it's a massive dosage of local muscular fatigue. You build up all this lactate, the neighboring muscles, and then your blood lactate, you're carrying that with you to the next event that requires the exact same muscle group. Can you imagine somebody doing a max effort 2-minute thruster, and then the next event 10 minutes later is a 1-rep max thruster? You know what I mean? It's the same thing. It's like you're starting off at a baseline below, and you have to train for that.
Well, and imagine, I mean, that's where I would assume injuries occur, is that there is so much precision in your sport, and the amount of speed, strength, and power, and from a technical side, and you throw in muscular fatigue, the fact is that coordination is going to fall. And I would think that we would want to put those athletes in the best possible position, meaning the most recovered going into the next routine. Yeah, I would feel bad for athletes that if they had to do floor first and they're not aerobically fit, that it would probably compromise their upcoming performances.
Yeah, you got a long couple events coming if you get the unfortunate random order of floor first, and that's been shown in some studies we talked about, is that people's performance was definitely correlated worse with people who started on the harder taxing events, because now they're carrying that fatigue through the event, and I think that's important to think about on a competition thing. But it's also gymnasts practice for 4 hours sometimes, a 4-hour repeated practice, and so many injuries happen in practice because I see the error being made that most coaches are just like, well, you're not mentally tough enough, you're not focused enough, and all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, but physiologically they may be in the tank, and you're asking them to do very high skilled movements at the end of a practice, at the end of a competition. And like you said, fatigue induces proprioceptive issues, and then you fall or you blow your leg out because you're completely gassed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I'm curious. So that the length of time for a floor routine, how long is that?
About 90 seconds, 70 to 90 seconds. It depends on the setting, but some of the higher end routines are up to about 90 seconds. And it is essentially a 4-second maximal, like doing a 1 RM power, like clean and jerk, 4 or 5 seconds. And then you have a little bit of recovery, 4 or 5 second pass, recovery, dance, it's just 6 to 7 passes within a 90-second routine.
Right. But you have these, let's call them surges in the middle of that routine.
Right.
Right. So it basically goes from something that is super explosive to almost a active recovery.
Yeah. And I bet that if you correlate it to running, it'd be like running a 200, 300 meter and doing, 20 meter sprint, recover, 20 meter sprint, recover, 20 meter sprint, recover, until you get to about 200 to 300 meters. That's about the same time domain.
Right. So that to me is interesting. So if it's a 90-second routine, I mean, a 90-second routine, if we just look at where the energy is coming from to make the muscles contract, more than 50% of the energy is coming aerobically.
Right. And
so if their training is only consisting of shorter time domains, just like a lot of CrossFitters back when in 2013, where they just worked on speed, strength, and power, that's all they became good at. But if you know that an event is the majority of that one event is aerobic, and you are not training your aerobic slow twitch fibers, then there's a significant hole in your arsenal of fitness.
Yeah.
And so so part of the great thing about CrossFit is that we do all sorts of movements. I mean, we do gymnastic movements and weightlifting movements. And I look at those movements and how can we put an athlete in a position to become better at those particular movements. And you must include the aerobic system, especially in the sport of CrossFit, because we're doing time domains in gymnastic movements and weightlifting movements longer than 90 seconds.
Right. Right. Yeah. And this is, again, next to the next point that you and I had a pretty aha moment on is in gymnastics, it's so bizarre because like in male gymnastics, the upper body is moving fast and producing lactate, but the entire lower body and core is in a maximal isometric contraction, right? Like you're squeezing your legs and your core as hard as you can to try to get the best power production and stiffness to kind of bounce and do things. That's how you're efficient through the air. And the women are the other side, whereas they use their legs a lot and their upper body is often very much isometric and holding, aside from a few events. And so you and I were talking about how like, that's a pretty rare situation in a sport where one half of your body is working in a fast glycolytic output and the bottom is working in an isometric, like very slow twitch fiber. Like training for that is challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think that just coming up with different protocols and trying things with athletes. I mean,
Right.
Some things will work on certain athletes. I mean, that's the thing that's I've learned in CrossFit is that there's a broad range of population in terms of ability and genetics, and not everything works for everybody. And I love the idea of trying certain things and establishing protocols during training. One of the things that is interesting is that, you know, in gymnastics, the time domains and the recovery periods are known. The muscle fiber groups are during those routines are also known. Mm-hmm. In creating workouts that can help those adaptations would be pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
I mean, as far because we would know the muscle groups, and I love the idea in gymnastics of doing things not just specific towards the movement. Like take the girls in the vault. That's to me seems like a very 5, 6, 7 seconds short time domain, very explosive. But maybe practicing working on that pure sprint. And being explosive, meaning pushing a sled, pulling a sled, and then going into a recovery period, simulating that walk back to the vault. I would think that second vault becomes pretty tricky for those athletes because that phosphagen system hasn't had a chance to recover.
Right.
But if we are training very high intensity, like a sled into a recovery of shorter time domain, I think we can create a very similar stimulus, meaning something like doing a 6-second sled sprint, whatever the equivalent time to hit the vault is. Mm-hmm. And then what I want to do is I want to do a recovery based upon the amount of time it takes for them to get back and do the second vault. And I want to do multiple rounds. I never want to allow that athlete to fully recover. And we call this like lactate stacking type workouts or lactate tolerance workouts, where each round is going to get more difficult for them to push the sled because of the accrued lactate in the localized muscle group. And then it's going to spill into the bloodstream. And the athlete's job is to keep the motor units firing. Mm. What we're looking for is a high degree of motor recruitment under high doses of lactate. And we put them in a position where that they will underperform in terms of their sled push total distance within that 6 seconds, but that's because of the accrued lactate. And that to me would be a workout that would help them in not only the recruitment of fast twitch, explosive, speed, strength, power motor units, but it would also help them with the recovery and then also performing under higher and higher doses of lactate.
Yeah, that's just like pure gold right there. I think that concept has probably the biggest impact for change in terms of injuries and also performance. And I honestly think that it will become gold standard in the next few years in gymnastics, because like you said, the time domains and the approximate efforts are known and you can train for that. I think that coaches that understand the basics of energy systems can maybe take a month in the summer before they start doing these very hard routines and train these adaptations in a very low risk environment, right? Like pushing a sled sucks, but it's not going to hurt you. Right? Like it's very uncomfortable, but it's not going to hurt your legs. So you can do that for a month and slowly push the fibers. And then maybe in the following month, which is what I try to do with the girls that we coach, is actually do that in a tumbling. So they tumble into a foam pit where it's low risk. They're not going to get hurt. And then it slowly changes those global adaptations to specific adaptations. And then right before your first meet, you actually do those things in a floor routine. But definitely up top in your brain is that if you have 2 months of training under your belt, you're not panicking when you stand in the corner and you have to do another routine or you have to do another pass. And you're like, oh my God, I hope I make it, you know?
I would think that those would be competitive advantages for these athletes, because putting them in a position that they know no one else is doing those things.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I also like the idea of finding movements. I mean, if we look at like the pommel horse, and like you said, the upper body is doing a tremendous amount of anaerobic work, and the amount of lactate that's accruing in the localized muscles, and it's spilling into the bloodstream. I mean, the fact that they get lactate measurable in their bloodstream after doing the pommel horse tells you the level of intensity.
Right.
I mean, it's really remarkable. And I would think that protocols that work the extremes of what they're about to experience, meaning we want to create an environment that is more extreme than what they're about to experience in the competition from the intensity side, but we also want to cover the other side of the spectrum and doing something that's more on the recovery side. So meaning doing a pommel horse routine and then going into an active recovery, and mimicking those same movement patterns. Right. Where the legs, they're locked out. I'm assuming there'd be tension in the hip flexors, and maybe going into some kind of a movement like a heavily weighted Russian twist, with a 55-pound plate doing Russian twists and bouncing it off the floor, and movements like that. We're mimicking the movement patterns that just occurred, but extending the length of time under control where it's safe.
Yeah, and this was another big revelation that I had for you, is that I remember you talking about VO2 max tests and talking about local lactate and how it's specific to the fibers and the movement that you're training, right? And this is when I really started to change a lot of the way that I was doing energy systems. Is my traditional upbringing in gymnastics was either we would run sprints or we would do routines. That's how we majorly trained for our cardio, right? And not understanding that if you want to train for the movements of gymnastics routines, you have to create the adaptations in the motion or the movement of what you're training. So us just doing sprints was very localized lower body fatigue and challenging, but we were never teaching our chest and our deltoids and our triceps to create and buffer fatigue, right? And that's something that I've changed a ton, is now we do a lot of specific, general upper body lactate flooding or lactate stacking workouts before we ask them to do a ring routine, because that's pretty much all arms for 90 seconds, right? Yeah. And that's super important for people to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those things are important. I like the idea of doing these lactate clearance type workouts that are focused on the clearance of localized lactate. So, I mean, we've been talking a lot about blood lactate, and that obviously is a valuable training protocol. And it is because it's occurring within the sport of gymnastics that the amount of speed and strength and force and power is so significant that we're generating blood lactate. But you also must recognize that localized lactate in the muscles that are creating that blood lactate are needing of recovery. And part of what we would like to do is to work those muscle groups on their ability to clear that lactate. And so finding protocols that mimic the movements, but then finding a similar protocol using the same movement patterns and clearing that localized fatigue. So think of it as a concept of, if we're, doing something simple such as, let's say we do push-ups, and we can do high intensity push-ups for a set amount of time and generate massive doses of localized fatigue in those push-up muscles, and then flipping over on our back and mimicking it with the floor press with no weight. Right. Just think of that as your jog recovery. Those types of things, what we're really doing is, yes, we're focused on lactate clearance, but think about what we're really doing. We're getting these athletes through an active recovery performing that movement for a longer amount of time.
Right.
And that is giving them an aerobic level adaptation. I mean, one of the things that we need to recognize is that one of the major measures of aerobic fitness is your rate of recovery.
Right.
A more aerobically fit athlete is going to recover faster. And so if a gymnast is saying, I am tired going into my next routine, then they've just identified their weakness. And that's what we expect from an athlete. Tell me where your weaknesses are. And then what I do is design a stimulus to adapt that weakness. But if an athlete's not in tune with that, or if we ignore it, then they're lost.
Yeah.
An athlete's job is to identify where they're struggling. And as soon as they communicate that to us, our task is easy.
Yeah, and I agree. I see a lot of people who are banging their head against the wall because they feel like they're at their ends of their knowledge level, and the athlete will say something like that, like a keyword, where you're like, man, my legs feel like concrete when I try to walk to my next event. Like, that's a very important keyword to listen to, because the athlete is telling you what we need to work on. You know, they're signaling their weaknesses. It's not that I can't perform.
Well, so just hypothetical. I mean, for you and people that listen here, is that so I was in the North Shore of Oahu, and I was with a bunch of elite level surfers. And one of the things that CrossFit's been really great on is that I'm pretty good at training and listening to athletes and where they identify their problems,
right,
and finding protocols then to address that. And when these surfers were talking, they were saying that the number one injury in surfing is a blown ACL. And you could see how that happens because they're coming down the face of a wave, and the water is choppy, and the board and the impact, and especially, you know, the back leg and the angle that it's at, you can see it hits a, you know, chop of water, and boom, there goes the ACL.
Yeah.
But my quest for what they were really saying goes beyond that. Why wasn't their leg more stable? Why was their leg wobbly? And they said to me, they said, but our legs don't do anything. Our legs aren't tired when we're paddling out to hit the lineup. And I said, let me ask you something. How fatigued is your upper body when you hit the lineup? And they said, oh my gosh, sometimes it's just like we can't, even though the perfect wave comes, we can't take it because our upper body is so smoked.
Yeah.
And we know if we have to re-paddle out that it will compromise us. And so I said, so the amount of fatigue in your upper body is so great that you have to take a long amount of rest. Absolutely, they say. So the thing is that what they're not recognizing, and they don't know, is that localized fatigue in the upper body translates into the fatigue in the neighboring muscle groups. And then just like in gymnastics, it hits the bloodstream. And when it hits the bloodstream, it goes throughout the entire body. Excuse me. And what it's trying to find is vacant muscle groups, slow twitch aerobic fibers to try and clear it.
Yeah.
And so where does it go? For a surfer, it goes to the legs.
Right.
But imagine a surfer doesn't realize that their legs are pre-fatigued before they go and stand on a 30-foot wave. That's what's happening to a gymnast, is that it's only upper body.
Yeah.
But what they don't realize is that their lower body, because it's not aerobically fit, it is not able to clear the fatigue that just built up in an upper body routine.
Yeah.
That is the consequence of what's happening. And the athlete is sitting going, I have no idea what's wrong. I went upper body to upper body to upper body, and my legs feel like jello. I don't get it. And that's what surfers were saying.
Right.
I don't understand why my legs are wobbly. They associated it with fear. And what it was localized fatigue. And so the protocol is that they thought that you would have to go into a running-based program. And the thing is that what we want to do is we want to simulate the movements that they're actually experiencing that fatigue. And so if they're in a prone position and they're paddling out to the lineup, I want them to slowly be kicking their legs while they're moving out, so that that kick can help clear the fatigue. But if they never practice the movement of kicking, if they never train their aerobic slow twitch fibers in the movement of kicking, then they're not going to be efficient at the removal of that lactate. So the protocols for them is, you know what? We need to do kicking sets in the water, no fins, short fins, long fins, and I'm going to develop your capacity to clear fatigue in the legs while you're paddling out for the lineup. Now, you do stand, and so we have to have some running,
right,
but it's going to be far less than kicking protocols. It needs to match the movement that they perform.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, just as you were talking ahead, like almost an epiphany or a fascinating insight is that's exactly what's happening in gymnastics, right? So the order of events in gymnastics, regardless of where you start, you go around in what's called Olympic order. So for male gymnasts, they do parallel bars and then high bar, and they have to go to floor. So upper body, blow your arms out, upper body, blow your arms out. And then I feel like garbage before I start floor routine. And by far, the research is clear in gymnastics injury epidemiology is the number one injury is lower body impact. So whether you over time land and you get hurt or you're chronically developing it. So whether that's your again, global lactate is jelloing your legs and you can't absorb well into a squat pattern, or you have a traumatic blowout of your meniscus because you land and you hyperextend your leg. The same thing happens for women. They do vault and they go to bars and then they have to go to balance beam and floor second. So they go upper body, lower body with high level of balance, and then they end on lower body maximal power output. I mean, that totally connects the dots for me of why maybe we have such a staggering injury rate. It's like a 75% injury rate in gymnastics, and they're tearing their Achilles left and right. They're tearing their ACL left and right. Maybe a huge part of this is the inability for us to recognize that the slow twitch fibers of the lower body should be used to recover between events to try to buffer some of that lactate that's floating around the body now.
Absolutely. So I mean, just what you were saying there. So you have two upper body events back to back. Now imagine if your upper body, that first movement generates localized lactate.
Yeah.
And it's going to go into the bloodstream. So, I mean, the studies that I've seen on gymnastics that it's enough energy output that they're going to create lactate in the blood after that movement.
Right.
Because they're not those muscle groups aerobically fit, that lactate is going to stay in those muscle groups, meaning for the next event, they're going to stack, and meaning the level of lactate is going to go even higher.
Right.
Meaning the amount that's in the bloodstream is going to be even higher, which it's going to go down in the legs. And so the problem would be is just like the surfer. They're not aware that their legs are pre-fatigued. Their assumption is it was upper body and upper body.
Yeah.
And my legs haven't done anything, so it will be a relief to go and do leg work.
Yeah.
The problem is that's not true.
Yeah.
That's not true. And the athlete, if they're not aware that that blood lactate is going to damage their ability in that next floor routine, that's how they could get hurt, because they're not fresh. If they're comparing their performances during a workout when they are fresh and now they're fatigued, they're not able to do what they were once able to do in the gym. It's not fair for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's pretty incredible, because I think globally as a sport, everybody runs into that same problem. They get to that, they're like, man, I have no idea why you bombed your floor routine. When we were at a 4-hour practice and you had 20 minutes to rest, you were fine. You know, there was no big deal. But when we went to a competition and you were last on high bar and then you got rushed to the first of the order on floor, you had a 5-minute turnaround recovery, and you just completely bombed. And I've had, looking back on my career, I've had plenty of times when I had to go from one event to the next and I got rushed in a rotation and I shit the bed completely. And I was like, dude, I've nailed that routine 100 times. Like, what's wrong with me? Like, it must be my head game. It must be the pressure. It must be the crowd. You know, it's like, probably not.
And I must assume that, I mean, with gymnastics, the mental game, the emotional game is a massive part of it. And imagine if you're an athlete and you're like, you mess up in something because of leg fatigue, and you're just not aware of physiology and how lactate travels and the damage that those two prior routines did. Imagine what that now does to that poor athlete going into these next events. It's so part of it is like, my feeling is that, you know, we as coaches, our job is to create, it's really to create performance improvements and fitness gains and those obvious areas. But in my opinion, the number one thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to create knowledge. That knowledge in that athlete is going to make them more confident. And if an athlete is aware that these things happen in these routines, and that the legs are going to be wobbly, and that is normal, I think that the emotional, mental side won't be as great. But as coaches, I mean, one of the things that we need to recognize is that we need to develop them to put them in the best possible position physically and mentally from routine to routine.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that, I mean, obviously education for coaches is huge, but educating the athletes about why you're doing certain workouts, what the intention is, the goals, why it's specific to what the training goals that you want. Like, that's very important. And even, I mean, I work with 12 to 15-year-old girls, and I still explain to them not in such complicated terms, but why we're doing it, what it's going to feel like. I usually do it with them side by side, so they see me rolling around on the ground just like they are. But if you give that athlete empowerment of why it's happening, what we're doing it for, and how it correlates to your performance, they're typically much more involved in their understanding that. And I've seen, especially I mean, gymnastics is one of the most mentally high pressure sports that exists in terms of how much pressure gets put on the athletes. And from studying some of like the energy system stuff and the Navy SEAL stuff, is that somebody who's freaking out about how tired they are and they're panicking because their legs feel awful and they're stressed out about that, that's still recruiting metabolites. That's still recruiting cortisol. It's still doing that. So when someone stands there terrified, and I've witnessed this from fortunately being at the games of some athletes, is that the people who can calm themselves down and say like, nope, my coach taught me about this. This is a normal part of how I should feel. And they can damper their system down. They actually have more like metabolic reserve to perform well, because they're not burning through all of their energy when they're standing there in the waiting tank and they're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. You know, they're actually able to calm themselves down. And that's a huge performance advantage that I've seen, is people who understand the mental part of calming their system down and understanding that that's a way to modulate their stress response and a way to modulate the metabolic responses. You got to be able to teach the athlete, this sucks, I know it's uncomfortable, but you have to stay calm. You have to breathe. You have to trust your training. This is so important, you know?
Yep. I see that when I put athletes in the pool.
Yeah. Almost drowning people.
Yeah. I mean, I asked them, I said, I always ask them up front when we go to the pool, I said, so can you hold your breath for a minute? And these are games athletes that, top 10 at the CrossFit Games. And I said, can you hold it for a minute? And it's just a joke. It's a silly question. Of course they can. And they do. And I have them show me. And then what I do is I take them to the pool, and they sit at the edge of the pool deck with their feet in the water. And I tell them, I said, I want you to slide down the wall underneath the water, and I want you to push off and just swim the 25 yards across the pool, underwater, no breathing.
Yep.
And if they've never done it before, they'll pop up in 7 seconds. And that's what that adrenaline rush does, is that it's a very real thing. And when you throw fear in there, you throw anxiety in there, it's going to compound the problem.
Total game changer.
Yeah. So that's where it comes back to that it's important that athletes are aware of what's happening to their bodies.
Right.
But that would then, if I was an athlete, I would say, okay, so then how do we prepare for that?
Right.
How do we best prepare for that so that doesn't happen? And that's what should be done. I mean, if you are given 10 minutes, which isn't a lot of time, then you should leverage that 10 minutes, because it's part of the performance. It's part of it's your event.
Right.
And just because we're calling it, transition time, it's still part of the competition.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah. And I would argue it's probably equally, if not more important than the actual performance itself, because you've probably prepared yourself for the routine 1,000 times over. What you haven't trained for is the transitions. You haven't trained yourself for the mental pressure of having to do that. But yeah, that's huge, man. That's equally as important to train in the environment as much as you can as the actual skills.
What is your routine between those two movements?
Yeah.
That 10-minute time period, what is that routine? And it should be autopilot. Every single piece of that time should maximize the performance of the next routine.
Yeah.
And if they don't have a protocol, then I would think that's an opportunity for performance improvement. There should be a protocol, no matter what you are doing afterwards. I mean, you look at Olympic level swimmers. Look at Michael Phelps and how when he goes to the Olympic Games, he is swimming back-to-back events. He is given a very small amount of time to recover, but his protocol of what he must do between events is critical. He's not sitting in a chair. What is he doing? He's actually going in and doing an active recovery in the pool between events. More swimming. But what if Michael Phelps didn't have the aerobic capacity, meaning he never trained volume, then that recovery would be detrimental. So here's part of the paradox here is that what if you never do enough volume? And now what you're telling me is I got to do some volume during my 10-minute break. And that ultimately is going to create a muscular stamina failure because I'm not fit enough to do that much exercise. That is the catch-22. But that should identify the weakness then.
Yeah.
If you are not able to perform an active recovery because of fitness, then it shows you how weak your active recovery is.
Right. Yeah, and that's quite a paradigm shift, especially for gymnastics, is 9 times out of 10 when somebody realizes the athlete falls apart for some reason they don't know, they don't focus on enhancing the active recovery. They focus on we need to do more work. We need to do more in that 2-minute window of flooding your body with lactate. They think that that's how you get the game changer, but not really. You know, maybe we need to flip the coin and say, how can we optimize your recovery between bouts? Not so much how much punishment can you take in 2.5 minutes.
Well, so I think it's both. I think that what you should be doing is both. I think that there is no doubt that the majority of the events within the routines are anaerobic, speed, strength, power, and the amount of speed, the amount of force that you can generate under high doses of lactate, meaning anaerobic capacity, is critical. Like that, like a sprinter, is critical. You've got to be able to perform with higher and higher doses of lactate. So we want to develop that ability, and we want to be careful not to convert these athletes into more aerobic capacity athletes. We want to maintain that power, but what we want to do is we want to give them the capacity to accelerate their rate of recovery. And if we are not incorporating lower intensity training, and I'm not talking about like low intent, like 60% of heart rate training. What I'm talking about is 80%, 85% training. If we're not incorporating that lower intensity training, then I think that they're going to have muscular stamina related failure. They're not spending enough time in that movement.
Yeah, that's very important. I think that something that people have resonated well with when I kind of apply your principles and teach them is the ability to maximize your time in a workout. So say you have 25 minutes to do some sort of a workout, and it's hard when you're in a group setting, but it's better probably to understand the nature of the adaptations you're chasing and maybe do 3 lactate flooding rounds with a longer recovery. Again, teaching the athlete why we're doing it, doing some active recovery work in between the sets, and also helping them understand that, man, you're going to feel awful on that second round, but this is where you're going to push yourself to get through it. So I say, maybe we just do a 2-minute bout with a 6-minute recovery, and we focus on the energy system, not just, you know, a 25-minute throw a bunch of exercises at you and it becomes just a steady state aerobic workout. Now you've taken 25 minutes into a moderately intense aerobic, like, you know, threshold workout, instead of doing 3 2-minute bouts that are specific to the muscle groups, to the energy system, and to the adaptation that you're looking for. And that usually is, like, personally what I found has been the biggest game changer for me in using some of your work is I can maximize 20 minutes really well with a group of athletes by designing and understanding a workout than I can of just doing, okay, everybody move for 25 minutes. And if you're hot and sweaty, maybe we got something productive.
I really, really like that. I mean, that's the thing, is that we have to recognize that those workouts that they're doing, the focus has been how much volume, meaning how much time am I moving, and what's the level of intensity for that movement. And what you just identified is the recovery element. Those three main qualities are all equally valuable, meaning the intensity is as important as the duration, as important of the recovery, not only the type of recovery, but the amount of recovery. And we need to make sure that we are identifying the amount of time and recognizing the recovery time. The athlete also needs to understand that all 3 of those things are equally as important, because sometimes it's the recovery that is preventing them from doing the volume or matching up of the intensity. Sometimes it's the recovery that's the weakness. And, you know, I always tell people that, you know, when I ask them, I said, how many push-ups can you do unbroken? And I mean, for a gymnast, let's just say, you know, for real push-ups, let's just say they could do 50 push-ups. Why can't you do one more?
Yeah.
Is it because you're not strong enough? Is it that you can't generate the speed, the strength, and the power? Or is it that you just get tired?
Yeah.
If you just identified that you get tired, then it is the recovery that is standing in your way of additional work capacity.
Right.
And it's a relationship, and that's what people need to understand, is that it is a relationship. Work capacity is dependent on your intensity going in, but your recovery going out. You can't just keep freight training more intensity. You can't just push more in. You eventually are going to fatigue. And the athlete that can clear that fatigue at a faster rate will be able to put more intensity in.
Yeah.
It's a relationship.
Yeah. And that's all that stuff is just so important. I think it's going to be something that changes quite a bit. And I really liked how you understand gymnastics, but you've never trained in it. But in the moment, you were able to say, what about a 6-second sled push? And then we slowly recover somebody back to the vault runway. Like, that's exactly what needs to happen, is people need to understand the principles and like, okay, well, maybe we could try this workout, right? Or, a 20-20-20 building and slow recovery workout. Like, I'm curious of your thoughts, and we can wrap it up on this because I respect your time. But so say we have the biggest problem we've identified is, again, 2 back-to-back upper body events and then a lower body event coming within 10-minute window. What is something that you would think would be valuable for a gymnast to train to try to build fatigue up body and then clear that with the lower body? Is there a certain workout you would value for that?
Well, so I think that just looking at just the entire events is the very first thing that I would do. I mean, that's the thing that makes CrossFit so challenging, is that most of the time we have no idea what the workout is. We've never, and when we walk in, we see that workout and we look at it and it's like, wow, I've never seen that movement combination. I've never seen that load scheme. And it's completely unknown.
Yeah.
Gymnasts have the answers to the test. You're given you know exactly what the workouts are. There are zero surprises. And so if we refer to that as specific training, meaning that if you're given the test, then specifically train for the answers to that test. And just like, in identifying, the vault in that 6 seconds, look at that and now let's train that. And one of the things that we want to make sure we do is we train way beyond the time domain in the competition so that the body is prepared for something much greater.
Sure.
We do know that if we increase the amount of time, that there's, a greater level of overload, and that's where we're going to find that adaptation. I think that that is the number one thing that we need to be looking at is those events and identifying what movement patterns are being done within those events, what time domains are being done, and then we can start writing workouts and protocols to maximize the performance as they progress through the routine.
Yeah, no, that's very, very important, is looking at the broad spectrum and then breaking those chunks down into specific workouts or specific, again, adaptations you're looking for. And then you can kind of build on that. And I think that's what I've learned the most, is you just got to tinker a little bit. You got to use the principles, look at the sport, look at the movements and try some stuff, and then just kind of flow back and forth between adjusting workouts. There's no set, nobody has an answer. Nobody has the golden rule.
No, and I think that just applying logic of the human body and understanding, I mean, that's the thing that I've realized. So I incorporate with the people that are at the elite level at the CrossFit Games. They run 2 times per week. And when I say run, they're maybe running 12,000 kilometers. So not very far, very 7 miles in a week. And what I recognize is that is not enough volume to interfere with their performances in the weightlifting side of the equation or the gymnastics side of the equation. This interference effect is something that is unknown. We don't know what is considered enough volume or enough intensity to interfere with another movement. But one of the things that's been fascinating is that, I've been lucky enough to coach, more than 24 champions at the CrossFit Games, and every single one of them, by running that amount, has gotten stronger. And that includes Rich Froning and Matt Frazier, who, former, he went to the Olympic Training Center for weightlifting, has gotten stronger. And we recognize that interference effect with at least that amount of volume is a contributor to overall performance. And that's what I find exciting about gymnastics, is that I truly believe that it will lead, if they develop their entire spectrum of motor units, there's going to be an increase in overall performance. If gymnasts are neglecting their legs, and especially their aerobic capacity of their legs, and what I'm talking about is incorporating a small dose of volume so that it doesn't interfere with the other movements, just as I said about in CrossFit and running, then they're going to have an overall performance improvement. I mean, imagine if they have neglected the aerobic capacity of their legs, and imagine if their legs, while walking from one routine to the next, or let's just say if they are walking during that 10 minutes, instead of sitting in a chair, and their legs are more aerobically fit because of incorporating a small amount of supporting your structure aerobic fitness, they're going to be in a much better position. And that to me would be, boy, that would be huge. Really exciting. Because, you know, it's the same thing I tell people. It's like if a marathon runner comes into your CrossFit gym, what's your value proposition? And it's not going to be nutrition and mobility, and it's not. They just want to know, I want to be faster. That's it. That's it. And so the question is are they neglecting other muscle groups that are preventing them from maximizing their body's fullest potential, their body? And the thing is that their legs, we've got to assume they're fully optimized. But what about through the protocols of CrossFit, I can improve the aerobic capacity of other muscle groups that are used in the movement of running more thoroughly, meaning the upper body. Because when their lactate develops in the localized muscle groups of the legs, it goes to the bloodstream and it eventually hits the upper body. And what if their upper body can clear lactate at a faster rate? What can their legs do? They can move faster. Right. And that's what we're talking about here. I think it's really an exciting space for the innovative coach and athlete that has identified their weakness of being, I just get tired.
I mean, that's all such great stuff. And I think that's a really good place to end on before we start diving off into some weirder stuff. But man, Chris, I can't thank you enough for all you've taught me, and I can't thank you enough for your time. I think that you don't realize it, but your contribution to Power Monkey and to the world of gymnastics is going to help a lot of people around the world stay a lot safer, and also probably perform at a degree that we've never seen before, because never before in 25 years of gymnastics have I ever thought about things like this or like you have taught me. So I thank you for being an amazing human, but also an incredible coach.
Oh, thank you, man. No, I really appreciate you. Keep plugging ahead too. When we spoke 2 weeks ago, I am just so blown away at your trajectory and the things that you are trying to do, and you're doing it, you know, just it's a quest to find a better way, and there's no better motivator than that. It's I'm just trying to find a better way, and I love your quest for that knowledge, and same thing that holds true for me. I certainly don't have things figured out, but I want to learn, and I'm super receptive to new ideas, and hopefully, you know, when you keep pushing along, that you're going to find people that are receptive and want to listen, and collectively as a group, you know, we can create a higher level of greatness.
That's what it's all about, right? A little team collaboration, a little bit here and there. But next time we hang out, I owe you a beer for your time. So thank you so much.
You need to come down. You need to come here and visit.
I will. Absolutely. I'm in. All right. I just can't promise you I'll do all those horrific workouts.
No. Nothing difficult about a nice little active recovery.
Yeah, I don't want to drown, man.
All right.
All right, Chris. We'll work in here, and thank you so much.
Thank you, man. All right, we'll see you.